And I was hanging out there in a tree all day long, 12 hours, and I got burned skin and so on.
But always there remained the discipline of steel.
Conan, what is best in life? To crush your enemies, see them driven before you, and to hear the lamentation of their women.
That iconic line didn't just define Conan the Barbarian. It launched Arnold Schwarzenegger from unknown bodybuilder to global superstar. But the journey to create this legendary moment was filled with near disasters, genuine danger, and production stories so wild they sound like fiction. Today, we're revealing 20 incredible behind-the-scenes facts that prove this 1982 classic was just as brutal to make as it was to watch. Some of these stories will completely shock you. And speaking of shocking, let's start with the most terrifying moments that nearly killed the cast. 1. The dogs were actually vicious. Remember that heart-pounding scene where Conan flees across the desert, chased by a pack of snarling dogs? Well, Arnold Schwarzenegger wasn't acting terrified. He genuinely was. These weren't trained movie dogs. They were legitimately dangerous animals that both director John Milius and Schwarzenegger later confirmed were extremely aggressive. During filming, Arnold was literally running for his life. Outtakes show him looking genuinely panicked as these hounds leap at him, biting and clawing with real force. The attacks were so intense that the crew had to carefully time each take because the dogs often ignored their trainer's commands. In fact, according to interviews, these dogs were so unpredictable, they even turned on their own trainer between scenes. Far from movie magic, Conan's desperate sprint across those Spanish sands was frighteningly real. Arnold actually punched a camel. The production didn't just anger movie critics, it enraged animal rights activists and environmentalists. The American Humane Association reported multiple disturbing incidents during filming. A dog was allegedly kicked, horses were forcibly tripped during stunts, and most infamously, Arnold Schwarzenegger actually punched a camel in the face.
Can you believe that? Huh? Can you
And yes, that scene made it into the final cut. But the controversy didn't stop with animal treatment. The filmmakers constructed elaborate sets in the salt marshes of Almeria, Spain, significantly damaging the fragile ecosystem. Environmental groups were furious about the landscape destruction. Between its graphic violence and questionable production practices, Conan the Barbarian left behind more than just cinematic controversy. It sparked real-world outrage that followed the film well beyond theaters. The entire set burned down after one missed throw. One of the film's most dramatic sequences involved Conan hurling a flaming torch through the palace's grand central window. The shot was designed to ignite the set and create a spectacular, fiery climax. Arnold lined up for the throw, took aim, and missed the mark completely. Unfortunately for the production budget, there was no second chance. The torch still caught the massive structure ablaze, and the entire palace set was consumed by fire. Since it had been built specifically for that one moment of destruction, there was no opportunity to rebuild or reshoot. What you see on screen is essentially the only take they got, a $1 million accident that somehow worked perfectly. Ironically, Arnold's missed throw gave the scene a raw, chaotic intensity that fit perfectly with Conan's brutal world, even if it came at the expense of an incredibly expensive set piece. Sandahl Bergman lost. Part of her finger-playing Valeria required Sandahl Bergman to dive headfirst into brutal sword fights with real weapons and minimal safety measures. During one particularly intense battle sequence, things went horribly wrong. In a clash of blades, Bergman accidentally had the tip of one of her fingers sliced clean off. The injury was both painful and shocking. But here's what makes this story even more incredible. Bergman continued working despite the injury. She later joked about the accident, treating it as just another battle scar from an extremely demanding shoot. It's a stark reminder of how genuinely dangerous the practical stunt work in Conan the Barbarian could be for everyone involved. This wasn't Hollywood fake blood and rubber props. These were real weapons, real injuries, and real consequences that the cast faced every single day on set. But these physical dangers were just the beginning. The transformation that Arnold Schwarzenegger underwent to become Conan was so extreme, it literally changed the course of his entire life. Sylvester Stallone almost got the role. Before Arnold Schwarzenegger became the legendary Barbarian, the role of Conan nearly went to some very different actors. Sylvester Stallone was seriously considered for the part, fresh off his Rocky success. Can you imagine Rocky Balboa wielding a massive sword instead of boxing gloves? But Stallone wasn't the only surprising contender. Charles Bronson, the tough guy star of Death Wish, was also in the running. The producers even considered football legend Joe Namath for the physically demanding role. However, director John Milius had a very specific vision. He wanted someone who looked like they could genuinely crush their enemies with their bare hands. When Arnold walked into that audition room, his massive 6'2" frame and competition-winning physique made the decision obvious. Milius later said that Arnold didn't just look like Conan, he looked like he had stepped directly out of Robert E. Howard's original stories. Sometimes casting isn't about acting ability, it's about finding someone who embodies the character so completely that they become inseparable from the role. Arnold spoke only 24 minutes of dialogue. Here's something that might surprise you about Arnold's breakout performance. He barely speaks throughout the entire movie. In a film that runs 129 minutes, Arnold Schwarzenegger delivers only about 24 minutes of actual dialogue. That's less than 20% of the total runtime. This wasn't an accident or a limitation due to his thick Austrian accent. It was a deliberate creative choice. Director John Milius believed that Conan should be a man of action, not words. The character's power came from his physical presence and primal intensity, not lengthy speeches or clever one-liners. Ironically, this minimal dialogue approach worked perfectly for Arnold's strengths as a newcomer to Hollywood. Instead of struggling with complex dramatic scenes, he could focus on embodying the raw, animalistic nature of the barbarian warrior. His most memorable lines, like "What is best in life?" became iconic precisely because they were so sparse and impactful. Sometimes less really is more. Arnold trained for 18 months to transform his body. You might think Arnold Schwarzenegger was already in perfect shape for Conan, given his bodybuilding background, but you'd be wrong. The transformation required for this role was unlike anything he'd done before, even as a 7-time Mr. Olympia champion. For 18 months, Arnold completely restructured his training regimen. Instead of focusing purely on muscle mass and symmetry for bodybuilding competitions, he had to develop functional strength, agility, and sword fighting skills. He worked with martial arts experts, weapons masters, and stunt coordinators to learn authentic combat techniques. The training was so intense that Arnold's body composition changed dramatically. He became leaner but more athletic, trading some of his competition bulk for the fluid movement required for sword combat. He spent countless hours practicing with real weapons until handling a broadsword became as natural as lifting weights. This wasn't just physical preparation, it was a complete lifestyle transformation that prepared Arnold not just for Conan, but for his entire future as an action star. Speaking of Arnold's incredible dedication to this role, if you're enjoying these shocking behind-the-scenes secrets, smash that like button and subscribe for more incredible movie facts you never knew. The role sparked Arnold's 1980 Mr. Olympia comeback. Here's an incredible twist in Arnold's career timeline. The intensive training for Conan the Barbarian actually inspired him to make an unexpected return to competitive bodybuilding. After officially retiring from competition in 1975, Arnold was so energized by his physical transformation for the movie that he decided to compete in the 1980 Mr. Olympia contest. This comeback was completely unplanned and shocked the bodybuilding world. Arnold had been focused on his acting career and business ventures, but the Conan training regimen had him in phenomenal shape. He kept his competition plans secret until just weeks before the contest, creating massive controversy in the bodybuilding community. Against all odds and amid significant drama, Arnold won his 7th Mr. Olympia title at age 33. Many competitors felt he had an unfair advantage due to his movie star status and the extensive preparation time he'd had for Conan. Regardless of the controversy, it proved that his transformation for the barbarian role had pushed his physique to new heights. The victory created a perfect storm of publicity. Arnold was simultaneously promoting his return to bodybuilding and his breakthrough movie role, launching him into mainstream stardom. But Arnold's physical transformation was just one piece of the puzzle. Behind the cameras, the production itself was spiraling into complete chaos with secrets that would make your head spin. The cast got drunk on fake blood. Here's one of the most bizarre production stories you'll ever hear. The special effects team created their fake blood using a recipe that included actual alcohol and lots of it. During the film's numerous battle scenes, actors would inevitably get this blood in their mouths, and the alcohol content was high enough to actually intoxicate them. Cast members reported feeling genuinely tipsy during fight scenes, which created some unexpected challenges. Imagine trying to choreograph complex sword fights with actors who were accidentally getting buzzed from fake blood splatter. The situation became so problematic that the effects team had to reformulate their blood recipe multiple times throughout production. Arnold Schwarzenegger later joked that some of his most intense battle performances might have been enhanced by this accidental alcohol consumption. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. In a movie about a barbarian barbarian warrior, the cast was literally getting drunk on blood. Just like something out of Conan's brutal world, they used real human skulls as props. The production designers wanted absolute authenticity for Conan's savage world, and they took that commitment to disturbing extremes. Throughout the film, you'll notice countless skulls decorating Thulsa Doom's temple and various battle scenes. What you might not realize is that many of these weren't plastic props, they were actual human skulls. The prop department sourced real human remains from medical supply companies, which was legal but deeply unsettling for many cast and crew members. Some actors reported feeling genuinely uncomfortable working around authentic human skulls, especially during the temple scenes where dozens were used as decorative elements. This decision perfectly captured the film's commitment to brutal realism, but it also created an eerie atmosphere on set that went far beyond typical movie making. Cast members knew they were literally surrounded by death, which added an authentic sense of dread to their performances. It's one thing to act scared around fake skulls. It's entirely different when you know they're real. The Wheel of Pain was a real 1,500-pound torture device, that massive wheel that young Conan pushes for years to build his incredible strength. It wasn't a lightweight movie prop. The production team constructed a genuine 1,500-pound torture device that actually required significant strength to operate. During filming, Arnold and the other actors had to genuinely strain against this massive wheel. The physical effort you see on screen is completely real. There was no faking the muscle strain and exhaustion. Arnold later described it as one of the most physically demanding aspects of the entire production. The wheel was so heavy and cumbersome that it took multiple crew members to position it for each shot. Between takes, actors would collapse from genuine exhaustion, not theatrical performance. This commitment to practical effects meant that every grunt, every strained muscle, and every drop of sweat was authentic. The irony is perfect. In a movie about building strength through suffering, the actors were literally suffering to build their performances. James Earl Jones wore a $100,000 snake. Thulsa Doom's iconic transformation scene required a real snake, and the production spared no expense. The massive python used in James Earl Jones's shape-shifting sequence was worth over $100,000, more expensive than most of the film's elaborate costumes and props combined. This wasn't just any snake. It was a rare, specially trained python that required its own handler, custom transportation, and climate-controlled environment. The animal was so valuable that it had its own insurance policy and security detail during filming. James Earl Jones, despite his commanding screen presence, was genuinely nervous about working with such a dangerous and expensive creature. The snake was completely unpredictable, and several takes had to be abandoned when it refused to cooperate or moved in ways that threatened the safety of the cast. The final transformation scene took days to film because they could only work with the snake for short periods. Every moment of that mesmerizing sequence represents hours of careful, expensive, and genuinely dangerous filmmaking. But the production chaos was nothing compared to the creative battles raging behind the scenes. The fights between directors, writers, and studio executives were more brutal than anything Conan faced on screen. The original script was completely rewritten. During filming, what you saw in theaters was essentially a completely different movie from what was originally planned. The initial script, written by Oliver Stone, was a much more philosophical and complex story that dove deep into Conan's psychological journey and the mythology of Robert E. Howard's world. But director John Milius had radically different ideas. He wanted a more primal, action-focused film that emphasized visual storytelling over dialogue and introspection. The creative clash became so intense that Milius essentially threw out Stone's script and rewrote major portions during production. This wasn't minor tweaking. Entire character arcs were changed, philosophical themes were stripped away, and action sequences were completely reimagined. Cast members would show up to set not knowing what scenes they'd be filming because the script was being rewritten in real time. Oliver Stone later expressed frustration with how his vision was transformed, but ironically, Milius's more streamlined approach may have been exactly what made the film a cult classic. Sometimes creative conflict produces unexpected masterpieces. The studio wanted to fire John Milius. Halfway through, the creative battles weren't just between writers, they extended all the way to the studio executives who were financing the film. Halfway through production, Universal Studios was so concerned about John Milius's direction that they seriously considered firing him and bringing in a replacement director. The studio's concerns were legitimate. Milius was going massively over budget, the production was behind schedule, and his vision seemed increasingly disconnected from what they thought would be commercially successful. Executives worried that his obsession with authenticity fantasy and brutal realism would create a film too violent and strange for mainstream audiences. What saved Milius was Arnold Schwarzenegger himself. The star had developed such a strong working relationship with the director that he threatened to walk away from the project if Milius was fired. Since Arnold was irreplaceable in the title role, the studio backed down. This power play established Arnold as more than just an actor. He became a creative force who could influence major production decisions. It was an early sign of the control he would later wield as a major Hollywood star. The original ending was much darker. The version of Conan the Barbarian that made it to theaters had a relatively hopeful ending, with Conan achieving his revenge and finding some measure of peace. But the original script called for something much more brutal and psychologically devastating. In Oliver Stone's initial vision, Conan's quest for vengeance would ultimately destroy him spiritually. After killing Thulsa Doom, he would realize that revenge had consumed his humanity, leaving him as empty and soulless as his enemies. The film was supposed to end with Conan as a hollow king, powerful but fundamentally broken. This darker conclusion would have aligned more closely with Robert E. Howard's original stories, which often explored themes of nihilism and the corrupting nature of power. However, test audiences and studio executives pushed for a more commercially appealing resolution. The change wasn't just about box office appeal, it fundamentally altered the film's message from a cautionary tale about revenge to a more traditional hero's journey. Whether this improved or damaged the film remains a subject of debate among fans and critics. Robert E. Howard's estate hated the movie. Perhaps the most significant creative battle wasn't happening on set. It was brewing in legal offices. The estate of Robert E. Howard, the creator of Conan, was deeply unhappy with how the film adapted their beloved character. Their complaints went far beyond typical adaptation concerns. They argued that the movie fundamentally misunderstood Conan's character, turning a cunning warrior king into a simple-minded brute. Howard's original Conan was intelligent, strategic, and psychologically complex, not the primarily physical character that Milius created. The estate was particularly upset about the film's depiction of Conan's relationship with civilization and religion. In Howard's stories, Conan was skeptical of organized religion, but not the spiritual savage portrayed in the movie. They felt the film reduced their sophisticated character to a collection of muscles and violence. Legal tensions continued for years after the film's release, affecting sequels and merchandising. The creative liberties taken with Howard's work created a rift between the literary and cinematic versions of Conan that persists to this day. Despite all these behind-the-scenes battles and creative conflicts, something magical happened when Conan the Barbarian hit theaters. The cultural impact was so massive that it changed not just movies, but entire genres. It single-handedly created the modern fantasy movie genre. Before Conan the Barbarian, Hollywood had essentially given up on fantasy films. The genre was considered box office poison after a string of failures in the 1970s. Studios believed audiences weren't interested in swords, sorcery, and mythical worlds. Conan changed everything. Its success proved that audiences were hungry for epic fantasy adventures, but they wanted them grittier and more realistic than previous attempts. The film's blend of practical effects, brutal action, and mythological storytelling became the template for every fantasy film that followed. Without Conan's success, we might never have gotten the Lord of the Rings trilogy, Game of Thrones, or countless other fantasy epics. The film literally resurrected an entire genre and showed Hollywood that fantasy could be both critically respected and commercially successful. Directors like Peter Jackson and Ridley Scott have cited Conan as a major influence on their approach to fantasy filmmaking. The movie's impact extends far beyond its own box office numbers. It fundamentally changed how Hollywood viewed an entire category of storytelling. It launched Arnold's political career. Here's a connection most people never make. Conan the Barbarian didn't just make Arnold Schwarzenegger a movie star, it set him on the path to becoming governor of California. The film established Arnold as someone who could embody strength, leadership, and the American dream of transformation. The Conan persona became central to Arnold's public image throughout his career. Even decades later, during his political campaigns, opponents and supporters alike would reference his barbarian role. The character's themes of overcoming adversity and rising to power resonated with voters who saw parallels to Arnold's own immigrant success story. Political analysts noted that Arnold's governorship campaign drew heavily on the same archetypal imagery that made Conan compelling. The outsider who uses strength and determination to defeat corrupt establishments. The Barbarian King became a template for the political strongman. It's remarkable to think that a fantasy movie about a fictional warrior directly influenced real-world politics. But Arnold's transition from Conan to governor proves that sometimes life imitates art in the most unexpected ways. The soundtrack became more famous than the movie Basil Poldoris's epic orchestral score for Conan. The Barbarian achieved something almost unprecedented. It became more culturally influential than the film itself. The sweeping, heroic themes have been used in countless movie trailers, commercials, and sporting events over the past 4 decades. You've definitely heard this music, even if you've never seen the movie. The main theme has become shorthand for epic adventure and heroic triumph across all forms of media. Olympic broadcasts, political campaigns, and major sporting events regularly use variations of Paul Douris's compositions. The soundtrack's influence extends beyond just borrowing. It established the template for how modern fantasy and action films should sound. Composers like Hans Zimmer and Howard Shore have acknowledged its impact on their own work. The score proved that movie music could transcend its original context and become part of our broader cultural vocabulary. In many ways, Paul Douris's music has had more lasting impact than any other element of the film, creating an audio signature that instantly evokes feelings of adventure and heroism. It predicted the rise of superhero movies. Looking back, Conan the Barbarian was essentially the first modern superhero movie, decades before that genre exploded. The film established many of the storytelling patterns that would later define Marvel and DC adaptations. The origin story, the quest for justice, the larger-than-life hero with extraordinary abilities. Conan's structure mirrors almost exactly what we now recognize as the superhero formula. Tragic backstory, training montage, gathering allies, confronting the villain who destroyed his family and ultimately accepting his destiny as a protector. Sound familiar? The film also pioneered the idea that audiences would accept fantastical stories if they were grounded in emotional reality and practical effects. This approach became the foundation for successful superhero adaptations decades later. Marvel Studios executives have specifically cited Conan as an influence on their approach to bringing comic book characters to life. The Barbarian's journey from slave to king provided a template for how to make mythological characters feel human and relatable. In essence, Conan the Barbarian didn't just revive fantasy films, it created the blueprint for the superhero movie phenomenon that now dominates Hollywood. Conan the Barbarian proved that sometimes the most chaotic film productions create the most legendary results. This barbarian epic didn't just entertain audiences, it fundamentally changed Hollywood forever. But speaking of legendary franchises that changed everything, you won't believe the shocking secrets behind Star Trek that will blow your mind. Click the video on your screen right now to discover facts about the Enterprise crew that are more unbelievable than any science fiction. And before you boldly go where no one has gone before, drop a comment below. Which of these Conan facts shocked you the most? And what's your most memorable scene from the film? Don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more incredible movie secrets that Hollywood doesn't want you to know.